The FBI is the investigative arm of the Department of Justice. Its special agents take an oath to protect the U.S. Constitution.
I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith.
To do this, its director has traditionally been afforded a 12-year term to guarantee its political independence. This is the story told by insiders of how this world-famous brand co-inhabited and then clashed with another brand, that of Donald J. Trump.
These were dirty, filthy cops at the top of the FBI.
A clash that will have lasting consequences for the U.S.
Under the Trump administration, what we're learning is the importance of norms. And there's nothing written down, and there's nothing that prevents someone from tossing them out the window. And Trump has broken a lot of norms, and one of them is to start to intrude on the independence of the FBI.
The president used Twitter to attack the Bureau's credibility. He said that the FBI's reputation is the worst in history.
You're going after the FBI, and then you're going after the Constitution. Because he has no respect for the separation of powers, he will keep pressing his advantage till, there are no institutions in his way.
We are going to the J. Edgar Hoover building, which is the FBI headquarters. It's always great to return and see that building and remind myself of what a 31-year career that I had, what a joy that was, and how much of it depended upon the leaders at FBI headquarters as to how we could maintain our independence. It was a very special time, and I had no idea where it would lead, but it led to a career that I wouldn't trade with anyone.
Ex-Special Agent Myron Fuller has been intrigued by Donald J. Trump since he first met him over 40 years ago.
I was assigned to the New York FBI office from 1972 to 1983. I liked New York because it didn't feel like a bureaucracy. It felt more like a bunch of people who had kind of formed their own system of how things operate. So it was around 1976 that I met Donald Trump for the first time. It was a direct request from the Miami FBI office to ask if I could conduct an interview of Donald Trump regarding an interest that they believe he had in purchasing the Fontainebleau Hotel in Miami Beach. The Fontainebleau had long had the reputation of being owned or run by the mob. That means that the hotel may be by name owned by someone, but part of it would be organized crime that may be running the operation. I asked him straightforward. I said, Mr. Trump, here's what we've heard. We understand that you have an interest in purchasing in some way, either financing or representing to be an owner for the Fontainebleau Hotel. And to that question, he said, well, I looked at it, but I decided, he said, not to go forward with it. If I wasn't working with the mob and someone asked me if I was, I'd have maybe more of an exclamation in my response as to, why were you asking me that question? I would say, in retrospect, I regret that I did not open at least a preliminary inquiry into Donald Trump at that time. I think he somehow skated on us, for several years.
Myron was enthusiastic about helping unravel Trump's past relationship with the FBI. For him, it was unfinished business. The first stop was Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, Trump's heartland where it all began. It was here in Beach Haven that the Trumps first got into trouble with the feds.
Fred Trump, Donald Trump's father, built about 16 or more of these apartment buildings. He wanted to rent these buildings apparently only to white people, because it wasn't long after he got going that the federal government filed a suit against him for discriminating against black people. One of his residents was Woody Guthrie. Guthrie moved into the apartment in 1950 and moved out in 1954 because he could no longer tolerate Trump's discrimination against blacks and other minorities. He let it be known by writing a song about Fred Trump, calling it Old Man Fred Trump, and was not very kind to him.
I don't like the way my landlord's treating me. I don't like the way Mr. Trump is treating me. I don't like the way that my
Donald Trump, when he and his father were being sued by the Justice Department for discriminatory practices, turned to the same lawyer as most of the big mobsters in New York, and that was Roy Cohn, who was, in many ways, Trump's mentor.
Roy Cohn was a legendary figure in American politics. He was sort of the dark, satanic prince of the McCarthy era, which was a viciously anti-communist, right-wing era in the 50s here. Roy Cohn was a guy who said never apologize, deny, 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 and attack. Always attack and counterattack.
That's pretty much been, Trump's way of doing business ever since.
Never said it, never thought of it. It is fake news. It's more than fake news. It's corrupt news. It's a whole hoax. And you know who's playing into the hoax? People like you. That's enough. Put down the mic.
Are you talking to me?
In the late 1970s, New York was bankrupt. It was taken over by Wall Street financiers. Trump became the providential young man that they sponsored to turn it into a paradise for the rich. Using his father's capital, Trump portrayed himself as the savior of the Big Apple.
I had a great faith in New York. Primarily our purchases have been in New York, and about 5 years ago, New York was not considered very hot, and cities in general weren't considered too hot.
He went on to buy the iconic luxury store Bonwit Teller, demolished it and transformed it into the Trump Tower. These projects came to fruition at a time when New York construction was totally controlled by the Italian Mafia. Ron Fino is the son of a Mafia don and spent his life infiltrating criminal organizations for the FBI.
I had graduated from high school, and like other children, I had to get to work to make a living. My father brought me to Freddie Rondaccio. Freddie was the underboss to Magadino at the time, and Freddie arranged for me to become a member of the Labor's Local 210. And then I started realizing how powerful the mob was and how they controlled labor unions in the Western New York area.
Trump clearly had very, very few alternatives to dealing with the mob and getting his projects built. You could say he couldn't have gotten his projects built without the mob. That's the way it was in New York at that time.
Have you ever knowingly done business with what I like to call organized crime?
I have met on occasion a few of those people. They happen to be very nice people. You just don't want to owe them money.
Yeah, I understand.
Don't owe them money.
I heard of Donald Trump being a friend on a number of occasions from different mobsters. Yes, he was a friend.
Trump was hip deep in mobsters. He even said during a panel discussion once years ago that he didn't want cameras filming him in his office because mobsters came into his office and they didn't want any damn cameras around.
In the early 80s, Walter Stowe, a colleague of Myron from the New York office, working on organized crime, became very close to Donald Trump.
During the time you and I were in the New York office, there were so many major cases going on that you weren't intimidated by taking on big cases. It was fun. We ready?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Walter Stowe ran a high-level informant, Dan Sullivan. Dan was a Trump advisor and his go-between with the Mafia.
I was in touch with Sullivan on a pretty regular basis, and periodically he would introduce me to people who the FBI might have an interest in. He said, there's a guy I want you to meet in town. He's a developer. His name is Donald Trump. Sullivan explained that Trump was thinking about getting involved in the casino industry in Atlantic City, and that he, Sullivan, thought it would be a good idea if Trump had contact with the FBI. So I agreed to meet with Trump, and FBI organized crime supervisor named Damon Taylor and myself met with Dan Sullivan and now President Trump in his office, and we talked to him about his plans on getting involved in Atlantic City in the casino industry. And in my recollection of the meeting is both Damon and I said, you really need to be careful if you're going to get involved down there.
The mobsters were involved in the casinos because of the unions. The hotel restaurateurs and other unions were controlled.
To build a casino, Trump had to undergo a thorough investigation by the New Jersey Gaming Commission. Despite his known ties to the mob, he was granted a license in record time.
We sort of suggested to him that if he decided to get involved in the casino industry, it might not be a bad idea for the FBI to put an undercover operation in the casino. That way we could perhaps see whether any organized crime activities were going on the periphery of the casino.
Years after being propositioned by the mob to take over the Fontainebleau, Trump finally entered the world of casinos.
Anybody who owns hotels is going to be an interesting person for the FBI to know, and somebody who obviously has the international connections and business relationships that somebody like Donald Trump has, I'm sure would be of interest to the FBI.
Furthermore, according to my sources, Trump was considered a friendly source to the FBI, that he cultivated FBI people. And that's, well-known behavior by people who swim in dangerous waters. They want to have a get-out-of-jail card. And that get-out-of-jail card is having friendships or being a good source for the FBI.
I had occasion to meet with Trump on strictly personal matters. He called me a couple of times. I had lunch with him. At one point in time, he took me to lunch at 21 in New York. We talked about the possibility of me going to work for him. He got the feeling through our conversations of how dedicated I was to the FBI, and at a point in time he said, you know what, you probably are better served to stay in the FBI, and we'll just, we'll remain friends. And pretty much that's what happened. We weren't close friends, but periodically throughout my FBI career I might get a call from President Trump having to do with really not much of anything. I left New York in 1983, and I continued to have periodic conversations with him over the years, but it's likely that people like Jimmy Kallstrom, for example, might have had a similar relationship with Trump at the time, and he might have felt like if he got pressure from mob guys on construction project that he could contact the FBI.
James Kallstrom was from this point on Trump's man in the New York office. Trump would cultivate this relationship. Kallstrom is a difficult man to reach. Myron eventually made contact with him, isolated in his Connecticut home.
Hey, Jim.
Can you see me?
We do see you.
We have to build a whole series of capabilities that were not existent. I was involved in that very thing, in upgrading the technical capabilities and building from scratch the surveillance capabilities. And we went from virtually nothing to 12 surveillance squads in the New York office. We were incredibly successful.
Kallstrom was one of the most powerful men in New York, supervising all the major investigations for over 2 decades.
The location of the United Nations there, an international city, high-level crime, expanded Kallstrom's responsibility to virtually every building, every apartment building, every commercial building in Manhattan. That gave Kallstrom a unique and broad responsibility that no other agent in the FBI anywhere else would have had.
In the last 4, 5, 6 years, there have been more convictions, more imprisonments, and more damage done to the structure of organized crime in America than ever before in our history.
The Mafia was soon forced into retreat by Rudy Giuliani, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York, from 1983 until 1989. James Kallstrom's surveillance teams from the New York FBI were central to his success. They brought down John Gotti, the local Mafia boss, who was eventually convicted through the betrayal of his lieutenant Sammy Gravano. Gravano famously mused about his power over Donald Trump.
I literally marvel at the sight of Manhattan when I see it because I controlled it. I literally controlled Manhattan. I think of Donald Trump and everybody else who couldn't build a building if I didn't want to build it.
Trump Tower was from its inception inhabited by organized crime figures. The New York FBI, and Kallstrom in particular, could certainly not have ignored Trump's activities. Trump, in search of cash for his real estate empire, turned to the Russians. Through successive waves of immigration, they had transformed Trump's heartland in Brooklyn into their homeland. Brighton Beach was now home to a cash-rich Russian mob, protected by the Italians.
Now, the Russian mob, when they moved in, they really didn't start moving in immediately. They came in gradually from Brighton Beach and in the other areas. And yes, there were relationships. There were relationships, and they developed them because the Russians had access to cash.
The Italians, who protected the Russian mob, ceded control of some of their operations. They made a deal with David Bogadin, a Russian mob boss, to run one of their favorite scams for a commission.
When the Russians arrived here, their first big scam was known as the Red Daisy gasoline tax scam. And what the Russians did was they established hundreds and hundreds of shell companies. They would buy gasoline stations, and just before the tax ban come, they would declare bankruptcy and sell it to another company. So when the tax ban come, they'd say, oh, that was the previous owner. And they did this, they started in New York, where they were skimming about $1 billion a year. In the 80s, that was an awful lot of money, and they spread to one state after another doing the same thing. And at a certain point, they had so much money that they had to launder it. And that's when you see David Bogatin come in and meet Donald Trump and say, okay, I'll take 5 condos. Trump liked to deal with gangsters. I mean, it's really good to sell to gangsters because they'll pay top dollar and they're not going to sue you. And so Trump came away from that first transaction, and there were many, many more to follow. Sold under conditions that set off the alarm bells if you're investigating money laundering. So if I have $10 million I made from selling cocaine, I can just put it on the table, and we can use the ABC corporation, or LLC, some anonymous corporation, to buy these. And when I need to sell it, I can sell it. And if anyone asks me where I got the money from, I say, well, I sold my condo. So the money has become clean that way.
Jim Moody is a longtime friend of mine, a former FBI agent. Jim and I served in the same office in New York City in the early 1980s.
In the FBI, you have to have a nexus for conducting an investigation that's a federal violation within our jurisdiction. What was the nexus when you weren't hearing anything about it? So he's getting away with it. And the city wasn't telling us about it. IRS didn't know anything about it either, I'm sure. So his condo, that Trump Tower, was set up perfectly for laundering money. Perfectly for laundering money. They could bring in all the cash they wanted and pay for it, and nobody would ever know who it was or where it came from.
There's a legal concept known as intentional blindness, deliberate blindness. And if there's a pattern, you can prove deliberate blindness. And in this case, Trump did it at least 1,300 times. And I think it's one thing if he did it 2 or 3 times. 1,300, you might say, is a pattern. Oops, I laundered money again. Oops. I'll have to check next time. Oops, I did it again.
During the 80s, Trump tried to get close to Gorbachev, convinced he could bring peace through commerce.
If you look at the Gorbachev era, to most Americans, we saw a very genial General Secretary of the Soviet Union who was making things much, much more friendly. There was perestroika and glasnost. We won, everyone was celebrating. In fact, I think something very, very different was going on beneath the surface. Once the Soviet Union crumbles, essentially the floodgates are open. And billions of dollars are out there. And that money desperately wants to be part of the Western banking system.
The fall of the Soviet bloc concentrated what little wealth could be gleaned into the hands of predators who had little concern over the necessary frontier between crime and capitalism. Jim Moody convinced the FBI of the impending danger and set up a joint task force with Yeltsin's police.
One of the meetings I was in Russia on, the first deputy minister gave me the name of a mythical, legendary Russian organized crime figure, Yapanchik, which means little Japanese, a guy by the name of Ivankov. He told me that this guy had been sent to the United States. He was a thief in law. Been sent to the United States to take over all Russian organized crime and get control of it. And we didn't even know he was here. So, used that information, talked to the New York office. They set up a Russian squad, and they started trying to find Ivankov. And they had a heck of a hard time finding Ivankov. But they finally found him, and he lived in Trump Tower. Here's this mythical Russian organized crime figure living in Trump Tower, but he's traveling down to Trump's casino in New Jersey all the time, losing hundreds of thousands of dollars. So we start really zeroing in on him. Well, Ivankoff learned of it, and he moved out of Trump Tower and went back over to Brooklyn.
Ivankoff was eventually arrested in Brooklyn by Kallstrom's New York FBI agents.
If you know New York, 721 Fifth Avenue, Trump Tower is one of the most prestigious, chicest, glitziest addresses in the city. You don't expect it to be a high crime area, but there was a lot of crime going on there. There was a huge high-stakes gambling ring in one of the top floors, all but run by Russians, and it was busted by the FBI. I think it was 29 people were rounded up. Trump had his home and his office in Trump Tower. He was there all the time, so he had to know about this.
Despite successive interventions, wiretaps, and arrests, the New York FBI investigations never homed in on Trump, as if he was protected or off limits.
Why is it there's a level of white-collar criminality that doesn't get the FBI's attention?
Special Agent Mike German is convinced that white-collar crime is a threat to national security and has always escaped the authorities of a country obsessed by profit.
This failure of the FBI to recognize that crimes by establishment figures can have the same impact, and in fact a greater impact on our global security than anything that some violent guy with a gun can really accomplish. There is a national security issue in whether somebody who has engaged in corrupt behavior can lead our country in a way that isn't corrupt.
In the 90s, both Trump's affairs and marriage suffered serious setbacks. He divorced his first wife, Ivana, briefly married Marla Maples, his mistress, and generally spent a lot of time partying with his new best friend, Jeffrey Epstein. Bill and Hillary Clinton, who Trump was then close to, were in the White House, besieged by constant FBI investigations run by agents and a director, Louis Freeh, convinced of their moral depravity. In the 90s, the New York FBI was at the height of its power.
People say we had an attitude, but we had an attitude of winning. We had an attitude of doing the right thing, and not just there for the paycheck, which wasn't that great. I mean, my whole career up to the time I left, I really had nothing to do with FBI headquarters. I mean, I didn't even talk to them. I didn't have the time of day for bullshit.
There was always that disrespect from New York to headquarters, but headquarters kind of lived with it because they didn't want to upset the success of New York. And that attitude finally bit them in the butt on 9/11.
Asha Rangappa teaches national security at Yale University. She was one of many new agents hired after 9/11.
I arrived at an FBI that was trying to redefine what it was. Because the FBI, along with the CIA, had been left holding the bag after 9/11. The 9/11 report is not kind to these two agencies.
Robert Mueller took over the FBI shortly before 9/11. He successfully maintained all its prerogatives, despite the failures of the Bureau.
The FBI was at a crossroads at that point. Mueller came in when Congress was seriously considering whether to split up the FBI and specifically to take the intelligence function out and put it into a separate agency and to leave the FBI as a primarily law enforcement agency.
On September 11th, we understood that criminal terrorist groups can plan overseas, recruit overseas, finance overseas, and then attack us within the United States. So we had to build up and are building up the intelligence infrastructure to identify those individuals before they can attack.
Trump's world after 9/11 was not too rosy. Many of his enterprises failed miserably, notably his Atlantic City projects, destroying any future the city may have imagined for itself.
Once he was $4 billion in debt, the Russians rushed back to help him, because this was a time when Trump couldn't get bank loans from anywhere in the West, with the exception of Deutsche Bank, which was famous for laundering money from the Russians.
The Trump-Russia Friendship Society was to do everything to save the soldier Trump. In 2002, Tamir Sapir, a self-made billionaire from Brighton Beach, financed a company, Bayrock, conceived to save Trump with Russian capital.
They put up all the money, and Trump would get a franchise fee that was quite high, from 18 to 25%, which is an enormously high fee, and that's how he got rich one more time. So he was back on his feet, thanks to the Russians.
Still clear of politics, hopelessly indebted, Trump sold his brand to his Russian friends to save his bacon. The main man in this enterprise was Bayrock CEO Felix Sater, a condemned criminal from Brighton Beach. The Berkeley School of Journalism recorded him being questioned by its students. Despite his criminal record, Felix Sater is brazen.
Nobody has branded real estate, right? You have branded vodka, you have branded jeans, you have branded clothes, you have branded everything. He figured out how to brand a piece of real estate. And I wanted to get into real estate, and that's how I met him.
Sater, it turns out, was a convicted criminal. He got into a bar fight and stabbed a guy in the face, causing 110 stitches. He also did a pump and dump stock scam, which was kind of the kind of thing the Russian Mafia did on occasion.
Although he had this checkered past, he spent years assisting the FBI and the CIA on a whole range of matters, both involving mob influence on Wall Street, as well as information he was able to glean from his Russian sources about Al-Qaeda and bin Laden and potential attacks on American troops in Afghanistan.
He was cooperating with the FBI and getting them various stuff on counterterrorism and so forth, but the FBI was letting him to do his criminal activities, which happened to be laundering money with Donald Trump.
We were in the building. We were in Trump Tower. We were on the 24th floor. Trump Organization's on the 26th floor.
Did you guys get along?
Yes.
How would you characterize your relationship?
Friendly.
Witness in a civil suit involving Sater, Donald Trump was recorded under oath.
I do. About how many times have you conversed with Mr. Sater?
Over the years?
Over the years, if you could estimate.
Not many.
Not many.
If he were sitting in the room right now, I really wouldn't know what he looked like.
Okay.
I have met him hundreds, maybe thousands of times.
Trump wanted to build a tower in Moscow. He needed help. Enter another character from Trump's heartland. Felix Sater had a childhood friend, Michael Cohen. Michael Cohen was to help Trump in his expansion into Russia. They were aiming for the Kremlin.
Trump began finagling with the Russians to perhaps build a hotel in Russia, in which we now know from his former consigliere, Michael Cohen, he was offering Putin himself perhaps the top floor of a Moscow hotel if he could build the Trump Moscow.
It was a way to get the ultimate green light he wanted and needed for his business deal, at least from Trump's perspective. He sees this as you go to the top guy, you get him on board, your business deal will go through.
You know, I was in Moscow a couple of months ago. I owned the Miss Universe pageant, and they treated me so great. Putin even sent me a present, beautiful present with a beautiful note. I spoke to all of his people.
What happened with that Trump Tower deal he was hoping to get in Moscow at the end of 2013 is that in February 2014, Putin decides to annex Crimea. That's when the Russians intervene. That's when sanctions shortly thereafter get imposed by the United States and the European Union. And one of the sanctioned entities was going to be one of the financial institutions, the VTB Bank, that was going to finance Trump's tower deal.
Ladies and gentlemen, I am officially running for President of the United States, and we are going to make our country great again.
From the moment Trump was running for president, FBI's counterintelligence was obliged to vet the candidate and his links to foreign powers. This was not the FBI that Trump made deals with. Myron went to see Craig Unger, who was convinced that FBI counterintelligence had been surveying Trump's Russian contacts for decades, and therefore Trump.
A little before the Russian Mafia really came in here, there was an electronics store on Lower Fifth Avenue near the Flatiron Building. It was called the Joy Ludd Electronics, and it was owned or co-owned by a man named Semyon Kislin.
Здравствуйте. Меня зовут Сэм Кислин. Я американский бизнесмен.
And Kislin, who turned out to be a long time associate of Donald Trump's for more than 40 years, was, according to my sources, part of the KGB. And the electronics store was said to be a KGB front. This was the KGB's outreach to Trump.
Right.
Trump's contacts with dubious organized crime figures connected to Soviet and Russian intelligence created a dangerous breach that an opportunistic Russian adversary could easily exploit.
The Russian Mafia is effectively an arm of Russian intelligence. It was of the KGB. I interviewed Oleg Kalugin, who had been head of counterintelligence for the KGB, and when I asked him about the Mafia, he said, oh, that's just another branch of the KGB. There was a series of operations that proceeded sequentially, all of which had KGB tradecraft as part of them.
Felix Sater and Michael Cohen did not seem to realize that they were working for a future president. By mixing property development with US foreign affairs, they were not only compromising themselves and the possible future president, but perhaps committing illegal actions. An email from Felix Sater was sent to Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, in November 2015. I will get Putin on this program and we will get Donald elected. Buddy, our boy can become president.
Trump invited the Russians to help him publicly in the campaign, and he clearly did everything he could to deflect from what the Russians were up to. His actions, his public statements gave Vladimir Putin cover to conduct the kind of attack on American democracy that unfolded.
Russia was trying to attack these fundamental democratic values and processes by pitting Americans against each other, right? By essentially trying to destroy the social trust that binds the democratic social fabric.
It was never important to the Kremlin who actually won the elections. It simply sought to sow discord and destroy confidence in democratic institutions. Goals they shared with Donald Trump.
In that sense, one can say Trump aided and abetted a conspiracy by the Russian government to interfere in our elections.
From Trump's nomination as the Republican presidential candidate, his team's frenetic overtures to the Russians aroused the suspicion of the FBI.
The FBI launched a counterintelligence investigation, Crossfire Hurricane, at the end of July in 2016 into members of the Trump campaign. So this was a counterintelligence investigation, and by its nature, those probes are classified. It would have been counterproductive to say anything, as well as probably illegal to say anything publicly during that time.
Hillary Rodham Clinton.
An inquiry into Democratic candidate Hillary Clinton's possibly criminal use of a private email server for government business was ongoing.
Good morning. I'm here to give you an update on the FBI's investigation of Secretary Clinton's use of a personal email system during her time as Secretary of State.
The FBI determined there was not sufficient evidence to justify any criminal prosecution, and typically that's what closes a case.
The decision perplexes me. It perplexes Jim Kallstrom, who worked for him. It perplexes numerous FBI agents who talk to me all the time. And it embarrasses some FBI agents.
Suddenly, Giuliani was on TV saying, well, FBI agents in New York are in a revolt over this. And guess who else began showing up on Fox News to besmirch James Comey? James Kallstrom.
I've talked to about 15 different agents, both on the job and outside the job, that are basically worried about the reputation of the agency they love, that they worked hard for all their life. And it's not Comey's right to sully that reputation or to soil that reputation.
There was a persistent animus toward the Clintons within the FBI at the time. So that may have generated not so much a pro-Trump feeling as an anti-Clinton feeling. But there was reporting that the New York FBI, for example, was Trumpland.
Trumpland was about to produce what became known as its October surprise. A laptop they had recently seized from ex-Congressman Anthony Weiner, containing more of Hillary Clinton's mails.
With just 10 days to go until the election, yet another controversy. On Friday, FBI Director James Comey sent a letter to select congressional leaders announcing that the criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's private email server has been reopened.
Comey was very concerned about his own reputation. He clearly was also very concerned that if information about the contents of that laptop leaked, it could blow up and hurt the FBI's reputation and Comey's reputation. So there was a bit of ass covering by Comey there.
Good morning, it's Trump. Donald J. Trump will be the next president of the United States.
By some people's point of view, it was Jim Comey's public discussions of the Hillary Clinton investigation and his denouncing of her behavior that did not amount to criminal activity helped Donald Trump get elected.
Once elected, President Donald J. Trump was informed of the secret FBI investigation into his campaign team's ties to Russia.
Trump was clearly enraged by the idea that his campaign was being investigated by the FBI. He thought that would taint his victory, and he was determined to stop the investigation that leads him to fire Comey.
An historic shakeup in Washington, echoing across the nation. President Trump firing FBI Director James Comey, citing his mishandling of the investigation into Hillary Clinton's emails, but stirring criticism and questions about the FBI's investigation into the Trump campaign's alleged ties with Russia.
Are you angry with Mr. Comey because of his Russia investigation?
I just want somebody that's competent.
James Comey compares Donald Trump to a mob boss.
The leadership style is actually strikingly similar, and it's all about the boss. What will serve the boss best? How are you helping the boss? It's all about that person and nothing external to that. And that reminds me very much of Cosa Nostra leadership.
8 days after Comey was fired, the Department of Justice commissioned a special report on Russian interference into the 2016 election and the possible collusion of Trump's team. When Trump learned that former FBI Director Robert Mueller was appointed as special counsel, he was terrified and told his Attorney General, "This is the end of my presidency." Trump's surreal ploy to destroy the investigation into Russian interference was to ask Putin directly whether or not it was true.
I have President Putin. He just said it's not Russia. I will say this, I don't see any reason why it would be. So I have great confidence in my intelligence people, but I will tell you that President Putin was extremely strong and powerful in his denial today.
And secondly, sir, does the Russian government have any compromising material on President Trump or his family?
I think in a lot of ways having Trump, who I believe is a Russian asset, in the White House is the outcome of the greatest intelligence operation in history.
I don't buy into the idea that he is Putin is his handler and Trump is a Russian asset. That clearly goes further than what we know. But it remains inexplicable, the deference that Trump shows to Putin.
Putin has sworn an oath twice I know of to destroy the United States. He's done a damn good job of it right now. I mean, and Trump doesn't know why he would be doing stuff like that. Well, he swore an oath to do something like that. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here.
During Robert Mueller's investigation, 34 people, including 12 Russians, were indicted. Michael Cohen, Trump's personal lawyer, was sentenced to 3 years in prison. By the time the report was finally published, Trump had fired everyone associated with Comey and the FBI and placed his man, William Barr, as Attorney General, de facto boss of the FBI. When Mueller's report was finally delivered, it was Barr who officially presented it.
As the special counsel report makes clear, the Russian government sought to interfere in our election process. But thanks to the special counsel's thorough investigation, we now know that the Russian operatives who perpetrated these schemes did not have the cooperation of President Trump or the Trump campaign.
William Barr knew that most Americans aren't going to read that report, and he withheld it. He made his own release in a way that completely misrepresented it, and he said it exonerated Trump when it did not.
Trump has broken a lot of norms, and one of them is to start to intrude on the independence of the FBI. There's nothing really to stop it, and it does get to a point where the ultimate check is that our Constitution contemplates for executive overreach is impeachment.
Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi launched an impeachment inquiry in September 2019.
The president must be held accountable. No one is above the law.
Congress eventually impeached Trump. But the GOP-run Senate acquitted him.
I've done things wrong in my life, I will admit. Not purposely, but I've done things wrong. But this is what the end result is.
Backed by a Republican Senate, a Supreme Court losing its right-left equilibrium, and most importantly, an Attorney General William Barr, who has always believed in a president being above the law, Donald Trump's presidency has systematically destroyed all the checks and balances that make American democracy viable.
If he's president, he won't be indicted, according to Barr, but he's not going to be president forever. So if they have cases like that, they want to prosecute him after he gets out of office for all those cases they have against him. I mean, I'm sure he'll get convicted for it.
Could you charge the president with a crime after he left office?
Yes.
You believe that you could charge the president of the United States with obstruction of justice after he left office?
Yes.
As long as Trump is president, protected by Barr, he can continue his assault on justice in the US and totally emasculate the FBI.
So if the FBI is shut down and under control and obeys the loyalty test, what's left?
Nobody.
Nobody? Well, not quite. The American people remain the arbiters of their destiny. And just as in Trump's Beach Haven tenant Woody Guthrie's anthem, they can reclaim what is their land.
This land is your land, and this land is my land. From California to the New York Island, from the Redwood Forest, the Gulf Stream waters, this land was made for you and